Greetings gamers, and welcome to my 8-man ToA 400 Invocation Advanced Tombs of Mascot Guide. In this video, I will go over in detail behind the meta to complete efficient 5 to 8-man 400 Invocation Tombs of a Mascot to grind for both incredible purple chance and very fast kill count for the 2k cape. The average 400 8-man ToA is around a 52% purple chance for the team, which is absolutely insane, which means every 2 raids you're expected to see at least 1 purple. These raids can be upwards of 10 to 15 mil GP per hour. Now that will vary very greatly depending on your team and the OSRS economy. Fun fact, since ToA release, this GP per hour threshold has been dropping significantly, so I would suggest getting ToA done as soon as possible. Likewise, I'm going to be showing a table of contents on the screen for every single section. If you want to skip through, I'll also include it in the description to save you some time. So enjoy. So your first question might be lone. Why would you do teams when solos are better? Well, it's true that solos are actually better purples per hour if you're playing efficiently, due to having an overall better purple chance for the same invocation. However, there are some advantages to team raids. So firstly, team raids are always going to be significantly faster, also significantly easier, also less punishing to individual deaths, easier mechanics, and the MVP system is actually busted in ToA. So for reference, in an 8-man, if you MVP, you get 400 points per player, actually 300 points per player in the raid. So in an 8-man, that's 2,400 points, which if you're doing a 400 invocation, that's equivalent to receiving 8,700 points in chambers in terms of purple chance, which is nuts. The only downside about team raids is there's more downtime, typically. Now that could be avoided with better teams, and you're also relying on finding teammates, and there's also less purples per hour as opposed to solos. Now for this video, I will be making a few assumptions. So firstly, I will assume that you have overall mastery of all basic ToA invocations and basic ToA mechanics. You also have general knowledge or the ability to Red X and Butterfly. Now this isn't a requirement to do these raids, but if you do not know one or the other, I would suggest avoiding taking that role, and there are ways to avoid that, and I will show that in each appropriate category. Likewise, you should have near max or close to max gear, and I'll show the gear sub after. And as a frame of reference, if you're not able to do a solo 350 without a yellow Keris, I would avoid touching team 400s altogether until you're at least able to do that, because I think it would be a detriment to your team, and that's me being polite. Now in terms of the gear setup, this is the main DPS gear setup, and I will show different setups later for different roles, but this is what everyone should be essentially using. Now, in terms of the DPS role, you should bring the best gear you possibly have. Of course, in my case, I'm missing Torva, and I'm also missing the Voidwaker. Now, if you don't have a Shadow, you can downgrade to a Sang or a Trident. If you don't have a T-bow, you can downgrade to a Bofa with Crystal Armor. And for the melee weapon, you absolutely need a Fang. If you don't have a Fang, I would not bother with these. In terms of your spec weapon, you should use a ZCB or Voidwaker. Now, the ZCB is better everywhere except for Baba and Kephri, and that's where the Karasi or the Voidwaker would be better. In terms of your gear, you should of course have Missouri, Ancestral, and at least Torva or Bandos, and you can also downgrade to Arma and Arms if needed. In terms of your spellbook, you absolutely need to be on Arceus with Thralls. Thralls is such a big DPS increase. Now if you're not comfortable, you can switch to Blood Barrage, but that will be a detriment to your team. And if you're joining advanced teams, that will not cut it. In terms of the pre-pot to enter the room, I usually do a Divine Super Combat, Divine Ranging Potion, my Imbued Heart, and a Stamina if I'm doing Baba first because it's just more convenient, and an Anti-Venom, and of course Angling Up if possible. This is why I actually bring an Anti-Venom with me, because I pot it as I enter Baba, and that way I like to have an empty inventory slot, because that way when I gear up, I can actually wear my stuff and not have to worry about dropping an extra piece of food immediately. Now there are 3 main roles for ToA. The first being the DPS role, which is what I just showed you. The second role being a BGSer role, where one person in the team will bring a Bandle Scott Sword. Now, the Bandos Godsword is actually really useful in 8-man 400s. It can speed up the raid from up to 20 to 30 seconds, and it's definitely worth having someone bring it. Now, I usually switch the Rapier slash Voidwicke for the Bandos Godsword, but you can switch out other things, or you can bring it as an additional switch if you're comfortable with the space. Now for the BGS, you only want the BGS Baba and also Zebak. You can also BGS P1 Warden, but that assumes that your team does not have shadows, which would be unlikely. Now the second gear setup is actually bringing a red Keris. Now the red Keris role is one of the most important roles, and it's worth bringing in 5+ mans. However, in a 5-man, I think it's borderline worth, so I would only bring a Keris in 6-man and above. The gear setup is a lot easier. You don't have to bring ZCB, and you don't have to bring a Voidwaker. I bring a Rapier for the core. And on a side note, the red Keris saves a lot of time. If you coordinate correctly with your team and spread the ZCBs right after red Kerising, you can add significantly damage per second on your ZCB and speed up the rate significantly. In an ideal world, the red Keriser would always go double power and dump Keris more often. However, that's not always easy to do, especially if you are an Iron. And as such, you don't have to do double power, or you can delegate to a main that goes double power and someone else drops them an Ambrosia potion. Now here we have some more advanced roles. Now just to be sure that you understand, these are never really used in We Do Raids. However, if you plan to do max efficiency teams and forming your own teams with friends, I would suggest trying to go with roles like this that are more defined. Essentially, you have the Keriser, BGSer, like I mentioned earlier. You have one person, everyone else is geared in DPS role, by the way. One person's going to do the Butterfly for Akkha, one person's going to Red X Baba, one person does Southeast Mirror, Northeast Mirror, and West Mirror for the Akkha puzzle, and one more person does mining / cleaning the mirrors. This ensures you have max coordination. You can also have 2 people always do the puzzles at Kephri, that way there's no confusion and no overstepping. Alright, in terms of the invocations, there are 3 different options I can suggest. We have the easy, medium, and hard levels. Now the easy is very casual. This is the easiest invocation to get 400 raid level. You can also turn on Boulder Dash for a 410 invocation, which is typically the norm for ToA in FFA / We Do Raids. However, note that the invocation level scales differently in ToA beyond 400, and the effect is 1/3. So for instance, going from 395 to 400 invocation, so a +5, is equivalent to going to 400 to 415. But it's still technically worth it to increase invocation, but it does add extra time and difficulty to the raid with lesser reward. Now, the easiest invocation like this, there is less help needed, and also walk the path on. If you want to speed up the raid significantly, taking off Boulder Dash and 1 boulder skipping is a huge time save. Turning off the more overloads is a massive time save as well. In the intermediate setup, as you know, as you see here, we reduce the supplies, turn off more overloads, and this makes Kephri slightly faster. And also, the less supplies does make the raid slightly more difficult, so that is definitely a trade-off you need to value with your team. The final hard invocation level is the advanced pathless, where you turn off walk the path. Now by turning off walk the path, you save a lot of time because all the rooms are level 0. However, to compensate, you need to have no help needed, which means you get 1 salt and 1 ambrosia. And also you need to turn on quiet prayers, which means you take 10% damage through prayer. Now this combination is very hard to manage, and it would only be done in max efficiency teams when you're going with really big gamers. In We Do Raids FFA, you would never see raids like this, but maybe in the future if the meta changes, it might become more common. RPB and raids like that are 19-minute 40, and you can definitely get consistently sub 22 minutes. Now in terms of team forming, you have 2 choices, the first being FFA World and the second one being We Do Raids, which is a Discord channel. In the FFA world, there are currently 2 worlds dedicated to FFA, World 329 for NA and World 511 for EU. However, the EU world is quite dead as of lately. Now, these worlds are free for anyone to join regardless of if you're We Do Raid, status gear on Rune Watch or whatever, and all the purples are free for all, so there is no splits. The only requirement to join, as far as I know, is at least a Fang. However, some teams will set requirements such as T-Bow or Shadow or both, or kill count specific, max gear, thralls, and so on. So be respectful of those requirements and only join if you meet the requirements. FFA world is a very small world, and you'd be surprised how many people pot regularly. And you don't want to be known as one of the shitter that joins random teams without the requirements, because that might affect you in the future for joining teams not only in FFA but also in weedy raids. Lastly, for Redo8's ToA, they do offer alternative to forming teams. They have channels for both 300 and 400s and even 500 ToA. Now, these raids are always going to be split. However, there is an FFA section, but I would not recommend using that. So make sure you're capable of splitting everything if you're an Iron, or if you're a main, you're actually willing to do it. Redo raids have a lot of rules that you need to follow and gear requirements in our channels, so make sure to read those appropriately and follow them with respect. Weedy Raids is a great resource. I've done many raids there, although I've had some personally horrible experiences, but also had some great experiences and met some wonderful people there. So yeah, those are the two options. Okay, so in terms of the room ordering, there are 2 room orders that people tend to follow. There's also a third option that is used for speedruns, and I'll go over each one. So option 1 is doing Zebak first. Now this is the easiest path that most people take in weedy raids and FFA. Doing Zebak first is safer due to upset stomach, having a chance to wipe the team if a potato teammate, which could be myself sometimes, pushes the jug incorrectly. Having the room first ensures that if this mistake occurs, your team wipes immediately at the start of the raid and not at the end, at the last room. The second option is you flip Baba and Zebak and you do Zebak at the end. This option is more efficient because doing Zebak last allows you to have Assault, and the Salt gives you a plus 13 range levels over the ranging potion, as opposed to Salt for Kephri or Baba that gives you a plus 7 melee stats. Now, I do believe Baba first is the best option, but that is definitely fully up to you to decide, and sometimes a team will always do Zebak first. Now, option 3, I'm mentioning here just for your information. Some people do Kephri first for speedrunning purposes. This room is to order to maximum efficiency because you can pre-angler for Kephri and you can also pre-imbued heart. Now, if you have an angler, you can have higher hit points, so you can venge bomb Kephri attacks and also use a shadow with heart to deal more damage. Now, this will never be used in 400s unless you're going for world record runs, but it's still interesting to mention. Alright, sorry for milking for 12 minutes before getting into the rooms, but now that everyone's up to speed. Now, in terms of Baba Puzzle, there isn't really much to say here. Avoid losing ticks, try to always be hitting something. The team should split into every corner and call either V, P, or DD accordingly. You can also dump specs on the first 4 waves if you want to speed it up slightly with either Void Waker or Claws. You should always focus on the Shamans because they'll summon Thralls first, and also kill everything as soon as you can. In more advanced teams, instead of calling DD, they call C for Corruption, and essentially what you do is you do a buddy system where you pair up with someone else, use the potion on them, they use it on you, and you keep DPSing. That is quite a time save, but of course it's not always done in weedy raids. Now for the Baba fight itself, the red Karis will immediately run in, instantly dump a red Karis spec. Following that, the rest of the team will either dump their BGS spec or the ZCB/Voidbreaker specs. Now note the red Karis will dump the spec the second time after the 33% health mark after boulders. Now please note here for the specs, Voidbreaker is better than ZCB and ZCB is better than Dragon Claws. Without Boulder Dash, you can stand at the bottom of the row and you can one tick skip the boulders as seen from this example. This is the reason why Boulder Dash is a huge time save if you can turn it off. However, you need multiple people in your team to do it with you, because if no one blowpipes with you, it will not work. Now please, 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 for the love of Heffy, do not bring a Bofa for the boulders. Bring a blowpipe, use the blowpipe. A Bofa has an additional tick delay, which can actually cause your team to die, and do not be that guy. I've died multiple times to that in FFA and weedy raids. Please bring a blowpipe. It's the only good use for it. Now, Red X or not, that's a question you might ask. Red X technically slows down the raid because instead of doing a 5-tick Fang, you do a 6-tick Fang. But you can also start at the bottom of the slope and you can hit every 6 ticks with Fang. However, I do personally think Red Xing is worth it if you're in a less experienced team because it adds a lot of consistency. And however, without red Xing, you can definitely speed up the raid significantly. Alright, now we can start talking about the second room, Kephri. Now for the puzzle, it's very self-explanatory, but there are a few things that can help make it more consistent. Make sure firstly you have the Tombs of a Mascot plugin turned on for the Kephri solver. That is a huge save. Likewise, for the Kephri puzzle, only 2 people should be solving it, everyone else should watch and not rag the puzzle. For the final puzzle, it's a general rule of thumb to flip all 9 tiles together at the same time, and that way you hope for RNG to spoon a few of them. One person will snake through them starting from the top, and the other person will pick the correct one accordingly. You can usually average 45 to 55 second puzzle with this. In terms of the boss fight, right away one teammate will instantly red Calcs. Following that, everyone else should dump their spec. Voidwaker is better, following by ZCB, or if you have neither, a Fang spec is fine. There is no need to BGS here, however if you have no other spec weapon you can BGS if you would like. It will speed up the raid slightly, but the odds of your BGS hitting is very low. A second red Calcs will be sent after the phase when Kephri goes in the health phase. Now, after that, the rest of the team will dump spec, of course. It's also not worth specking the overloads as it's a lost potential, as you could be spending that spec on Kephri itself. Without more overloads, which should always honestly be the case, you should all DD northwest during the lung special. This leaves the entire room open. If more overloads are enabled, you can DD east to trap it, the melee, but I won't go over that because that's not efficient and I haven't done that in at least 400 raids. In terms of the swarms, you should have 2 options. Assign one person as north below pipe, one person as south below pipe, and kill every single swarm, because any heal will slow down the raid. The alternative is having one person primary swarm and one person secondary swarm. The primary swarm will send 1 fang hit on the overload, and then right away start blow piping everything. The secondary swarm will send 3 to 4 fang hits, and following that will support the primary to kill the rest of the swarms. This is more efficient but barely ever done in weedy raids, and it's only really done in the advanced teams. In terms of the overlords, on P1 you should kill the ranger ASAP, it's the only one alive, and then blow pipe to support your team. On P2 you should fang the meteor 2 or 3 times, and then attack and kill the major. However, in a less experienced team, I would recommend just instantly attacking the major, because there is a chance you wipe if the rest of your team are potatoes and do not attack the major. And by the way, I've wiped several times of this, and I'm speaking from experience. Now in terms of the Akkha puzzle, there's really not much more to say here. I would recommend looking at the ToA Discord for some resources, understanding the mirror placement, and one ticking hit. I don't really want to go into that because I think that should be understood by everyone watching this video. In terms of the room, this is a little tricky. One person should immediately enter first and grab Aggro to butterfly. If you do not know how to butterfly, I will not be teaching that in this video because I think there are a lot of other YouTubers that have made guides on butterflying and they've done a much better job than I ever will be able to. So please refer to them if you have any concerns about how to butterfly. The Calcs will Calcs the first and the last shadow. There are certain placements you have to stand to Calcs, and I will show you that as this is my role. A few tips for positioning if you are not Calcsing. Firstly, stand as far away as the butterflyer as you can. Do not rag the butterflyer or walk in Akkha's path. That could change the styles and rag the entire thing, which makes the raid significantly more annoying and taking more damage. If you can't butterfly, that is fine, but for the love of Heavy, do not pull aggression from Akkha. Now there are ways to pull aggression from Akkha, I will show that in the miscellaneous section, so stay tuned for that. In terms of positioning, what I recommend is you start off at this tile, unless you're red Calcsing where you're standing where I am. You will kill the first shadow, the Calcs will red Calcs, everyone else in the team should send their ZCBs. Once that one dies, and then Akkha gets to 60% and moves to the second quadrant, you can go stand on this specific tile, and this is the tile you will stay for the rest of the room until come phase, or unless the butterflyer makes a mistake or Akkha randomly changes. If you are painted by black balls, please do not move. I would always suggest right-clicking to make sure you click correctly on the Akkha or on the Akkha shadow, because if you misclick and you move, you can kill your entire team, which has happened to me several times, as always. If you don't have a shadow, you can trident or use Bofa on the shadows. It's still really good DPS. Okay, now we can talk about the final room, the Zebak. For the puzzle, there's really not much to say here. It's typically always a shit show in weekly raids and FFA because everyone just goes anywhere. However, ideally in efficient teams, you should learn the 33.6 second tech, which is what you're seeing on the screen. The tiles for this can be found in the ToA Discord, by the way. And this is very hard to pull off in 8-man teams, so honestly, it's not really worth doing unless you have a coordinated team. Otherwise, just grab 2 buckets, dump it in the center, and move on. You can do 3 if you want to speed it up. But that's it. There's really not much more to say about the Zebak puzzle room. It's quite self-explanatory. For the Zebak fight itself, there's not really much more to say either. Essentially, you enter the room, the red canister should instantly red Karis. Following that, the BGSer should send 1 BGS, or 2 if he misses. And everyone else in the team should ZCB. It's worth to do 1 or 2 T-bow hits, ideally 2 T-bow hits. That way you let the red Karis and the BGS proc prior to sending your ZCBs. And then afterwards, the Karis will and everyone else on the team saves their spec until the enraged phase. Once the enraged phase starts, the Karis will spec, following everyone else in their team to spec. In a proficient team, you can also choose to pot your adrenaline potion and ZCB twice at the end when Zebak goes in enraged. And this adrenaline potion will last for P1 and P2 wardens. But this is only works if you have a good team that goes fast and doesn't AFK. I would not do that in weedy raids or FFA worlds because it's not consistent enough to pull it off. But you can do it if you want to try to get better MVP chance. Now we can talk about Wardens. So Wardens will be split in 4 phases, P1, P2, P3, and 4. For P1, on the obelisk, the Karis will instantly Karis once into 1 shadow, and then following that another Karis, and then shadow camp until it dies. Everyone else should double ZCB as soon as the Kariser lands. Optionally, you can do 1 shadow into 2 ZCBs if you're comfortable, that works as well. You should also always tank for Zebak and Baba for P3, however the opposite side is also fine and completely up to you. Most teams do Zebak and Baba for the final phase, however I've done teams that are the opposite and honestly they're both very similar as long as you have aerial assault on. For the second phase of Warden, everyone should be standing on this tile because it allows you to path diagonally to avoid the windmill special attack, and also you can see the falling explosions a lot easier. If you struggle with these part of Wardens, you can also turn on Entity Hider to hide your teammates. That could help you a lot for this and also for the final phase of Warden. Now for the core, the Karister should instantly Karis spec at the start of the core. Everyone else on the team should do 5 DDS specs into 1 Voidwaker or BGS whack. For the second core, depending on the health, if it's under 50%, everyone can just Voidwaker poke it to death. If it's not, I would recommend spamming your DDSs to confirm the 2 down. The Karister can also optionally Karis the start of the second core. That could speed up the second core and guarantee the 2 down. However, it's not required. In my opinion, when I do FFA or weedy raids, I always Karis the second core just to make sure we get the 2 down. The small time loss is definitely worth the extra protection in ensuring a 2 down. It's not worth doing a 3 down in these raids, by the way. The chances of dying on P2 are quite high if you don't pay close attention and don't click Ambrosia. And also, don't be shy to use your supplies, it's very useful. So in terms of the Warden fight for P3 and P4, there's really not much to say besides click boss and don't lose any ticks. Now, a few things to mention is the Skulls and the red Karis. Now, as you know, you should always ZCB right after the red Karister. The red Karister should spec right after the first set of Skulls is completed, the second set of Skulls, and then ideally save the rest of their Karis specs for P4. However, they can optionally choose to spec an additional time after the set of 4th Skulls, the last set. Now, as soon as you see your Karister send a spec, you should right away send 1 or 2 ZCBs. You can keep an eye on the Karister. Usually, if you do raids with the same people, you should know around when they Karis and adapt accordingly. Also, for the Skulls, it's very important to do the Skull pattern as shown that I'll show you after. But note that these are like never followed in weedy raids and FFA. Usually in weedy raids and FFA, people just click any skull and there's no patterns, which loses a lot of time in the long term. But it's good to know these skull patterns. They're very fun to do. It's very it has a nice flow. It's very satisfying if your team pulls it off perfectly. If you have an uneven amount of people, one person will float. And typically the rule of thumb is if you look at the orb order on the top left, the people on the left would go left, the people on the right would go right. So in this case, I should be going right. For P4 warding, there's really nothing to say besides send your specs, focus up, look where you're clicking. A trick that really helps me on P4 Warden is to look at the floor, and click on tiles that are empty and avoid running around like crazy. There's no reason to be a headless chicken and running around anywhere blindly. You should be coordinating your clicks on empty tiles. Also, lightning could be dark on one tick and then hit the next tick. That means you can move on to it the tick before it hits, and that ensures that that tile will be safe for at least 3 ticks. I don't know if that made sense. Probably not. So since you've watched this far, I'm going to give you a little surprise and show you the purple that I got this raid. Haha, what a coincidence. And it'll spoil the episode it's releasing in 3 months or whatever. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go over some miscellaneous tips and tricks that I think are very useful for you to learn or understand and maybe could be applicable in the future. Likewise, after that, we'll go through an executive summary, and that'll be it for the video. So in terms of Baba aggression, there are 2 things to keep in mind. Firstly, at the start of the room, he'll target the person with the lowest health. If you want to avoid this, you can either chug Bruise to be above 99 health, or you can wait 5 to 6 seconds for Baba to target someone and then enter the room. After every boulder set, he will target someone different. Now, the way this rolls is not 100% understood by me, to be honest with you, but it's a mixture of 2 things. First thing, for sure, it's about how much health you have. So if you don't know how to red X, I would suggest chugging Bruise up to 99 plus at all times. That way you never get the Baba aggression. And there's also a factor about if you're running away from him, he might target you over someone else. And that typically happens when someone is on the bottom of the boulders. He might target them instead. Now, there's a glitch with Mind the Gap where for some reason it does not work on the most upwards row. This was figured out in the release, and I thought Jagex would have patched it by now, but I guess they never did, and it still works. I checked as a release of this video. Make sure you double check before doing it, by the way, because maybe one day Jagex might hotfix it. But it's quite a funny glitch you can do to troll your friends if you're on Discord. I usually open up a skilling interface and pretend like I stalled, but in reality it just works anyways. Another useful tip is for Kephri. Now, the eggs on Kephri have a very specific mechanic where you always max hit on them. So what you could do is you can use a Dinny bead to spec the eggs, and it guarantees a 35 on each one if you have enough strength bonus. And by doing so, you can essentially get a bunch of free points. Now, this is not really worth doing in terms of supporting your team, but if you're doing FFA, you can use this trick to get extra MVP chance potential and try to snipe points from the team for yourself. I would not recommend doing it in weedy raids or anything like that because you might get hate on it, but for FFA worlds, who really cares? There's also a trick for grabbing aggression from Akkha. Like I mentioned previously, you want to avoid doing this unless you know how to red to butterfly. Now what happens is Akkha targets the person on the most southwest tile of him, and also with the most defense. So what you can do is you can flick Bandos or Torva, and even a Dinny B if you have one, and you can grab the tank and immediately start butterflying. Now, I would only recommend doing this if you're the designated butterflyer, or if you're very confident, or you really enjoy butterflying. If you don't. So in terms of Akkha shadows for ZCB spec, it seems like gear switches don't actually make a big impact as much as one would believe. but a picture is worth 1,000 words, so you can take this with a grain of salt. Obviously, it's always worth doing all 7-way switches and rigor, but if you want to be lazy, you can remove some switches as per this chart. I calced with ZCB, AVAs, and rigor because that's what I used to do, and it seems like it's actually just better to do a 6-way and not even use rigor. Obviously, you could add rigor on it, but that's very interesting to look at. Well, lads, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe. A lot of time was put into this guide, even though I was a little fast on some of the graphics. Now, in the description, I'll be including the script for everything I spoke about. I'll have some Excel sheets for Calcs, GP per hour. Also, the ToA Calcs for 150s versus 300s versus 400s. I'll also include the ToA Discord in the description and the Weedy Raids Discord in the description as well. So make sure you refer to that. And also, yeah, that's about it. So besides that, special thanks to the people on the screen here for helping me make this video, or also teaching me some efficient strats when I was learning some 400s. And yeah, I guess I'll finish off with the clip of me getting the shadow after spending 3 months doing We Do Raids 400. 4! Holy shit! Oh my gosh, dude. 34 is this is officially on drop rate for completion right here. Boop. Oh! Oh! No, wait! Oh! Oh!